Alright, so here we are. I've got my piece of paper, I've got a little palette with a couple different colors of paint, I've got some water, a little water cleaned up, and a few different brushes. These aren't very expensive brushes, they're just, cheapy little brushes. You can buy them in bulk. Um, good brushes do tend to help, but we're not creating anything too big or too serious today, so we're not going to worry about it too much. Paper towels here. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to rinse off my brush, and for a smooth blend in the background, sometimes it helps to have a little water down on the paper or canvas or whatever beforehand. Now, because this is paper, I don't want to wet it down too much, but I do want to get it a little damp. So while it's still wet, I'm going to start with some blue here. Start with some blue. Now I am going to start adding some white here too, but I'm going to start actually making my brush strokes at an angle. So you see they kind of like radiating out of this top right corner. And I'm doing that because I think it looks cool, and because I would like to kind of denote that there might be some sort of like sun rays or something like that coming from this direction. All right. We always start with the background first and working with medium like tempera or acrylic, because you can very easily paint the background and then paint the foreground on top of it. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could just wait till this thing dried and then paint right on top of it. Eventually it starts to get pretty thick, but when you're dealing with like the process of how to go about doing this, it's a little easier with tempera paints to start with the background first. So that's what we're doing today. Now you can mix this stuff in your palette. I prefer to mix it on the page in this circumstance, because I really want to get some of those threads of color, the different like blues and whites and light blues and stuff like that. I want to get those threads of color in here. I feel like it just makes it look more interesting to look at, Anyway, while this is still wet, and make sure our background is dark enough that this will show. I want our background to be dark, but not so dark. I want to be able to see the clouds we're about to put on here. So there are a couple different ways of painting clouds. You can get the paint on your brush, get some white paint on your brush, and just kind of make like a scooping motion, I call it, or a scallop motion or whatever, or C shape, like the letter C. Try to keep, I like to get one side of my paintbrush to have a little bit more paint on it, and then aim that towards the direction where you think the sun is coming from. And that way you end up with like little highlights on the side that's facing the sun, right? Another way to do it is you plop the paint down and just tap, or use your finger to make little circles. Like if I took some paint, I can even get some paint on my finger. Don't be shy. There we go. Get some paint on my finger and kind of like make little circles around here. It's a pretty popular technique. But if you don't want to get your fingers dirty, that's okay too. Just use your brush. Either way is okay. There's no real wrong way to do it. The goal is really just to enjoy the process of making art. I like making art because I find it relaxing. It's just a pleasant, fun experience, peaceful, and at the end of it, you come out with something that, maybe looks good on a greeting card, or just kind of hanging in your wall to remind you of a happy place you visited or a place you dreamt of or something. So I'm going to start, now that I've got the sky, I'm going to start working on the mountains in the back. Now we're going to begin with the far off in the back mountains. So I'm going to actually add we're going to mix a little bit of blue, a little bit of green, and then some white. And the reason I'm adding white is because I'm trying to desaturate the color, right? So when I desaturate the color, it means that I'm reducing the amount of pure pigment in there. In this case, it's the pigment of the green, right? The green pigment. So one phenomenon that artists and I don't know who else, scientists I guess, have noticed over the last several, or at least several hundred years, is something called atmosphere perspective. It's something that we use in art to create the illusion of depth, but it's actually a real thing. So like you can, next time you're outside, or if you're looking outside your window or whatever today, look off into the distance and you'll notice that objects are when they're farther away, they not only lose detail, but they also lose like a level of saturation of their color. Like look at the trees off in the distance, and they may look a little bit more washed out compared to the trees that are really up close to you. All right, that's atmospheric perspective. And we use that in art to create the illusion that something is far away when other things are up close, right? So how far down do I want my mountains to go? I don't know. It's up to you how far you want your mountains to go. I'm just going to stop right somewhere around here. Give myself a little bit of extra to overlap. You know, when in doubt, give yourself a little too much to work with. You know, you can always, again, with this tempera paint, you can always just kind of go over it. And I could raise my mountains or lower them or whatever. At least I know that that's there. All right, so now keep it in mind that my light source is coming from the top right-hand side. I'm going to add a little bit of white to some of these mountains in the back, right? And it's going to be on the right side of the mountains. Ooh, that was a lot of white paint. That's all right. It's going to be on the right side of these mountains. The right side. Okay. And that's because we want to keep the lighting kind of consistent. You know, it doesn't matter if you do it on the right or the left, but if you want to have the situation, you know, the environment and whatever makes some sense, it's best to keep the lighting consistent. Now, if you've got multiple light sources, that's kind of a different bag. We can, you know, maybe cover that in a different video or whatever, but for this situation, we're just going to have one light source, and that's the sun, and it's coming from up here somewhere above us on the right hand side. All right, so that's it. That's my sky. That's my background hills. We're keeping it pretty abstract. We're keeping it pretty loose today, pretty, you know, expressive. I don't want to get into too much detail because this is supposed to be fun, and I want you to, you know, feel comfortable experimenting with this stuff. So I'll clean off my brush in between here. Clean off my brush, and now I'm going to start thinking about the mountains in front. So let's just see. I'll just grab some just straight green paint, and I'll just see how I'm overlapping that green from before. All right. I'm just gonna say my mountain is probably gonna be somewhere like this here. You know, yours can be any shape you want it to be. It doesn't have to look like mine. I'm just making little tiny choices here, and that's all it's about. Just making tiny little choices that by the end of your composition add up to a pretty picture. Now, before I get too wrapped up in finishing these mountains off, I want to think about adding my river here. I want to add a little river. So I'm going to visualize my river's coming back from here somewhere, and it's going to come out here and then probably open up somewhere in there. So I'm not going to paint the green under the river. I mean, I could if I really, you know, was trying to be super thorough about it, but I'll save myself the trouble of having to wait for it to dry and then paint over and all that stuff. And if you know ahead of time what you're going to do, it's a lot easier to plan, right? So we just made a plan for a river, and we're going to execute that plan in just a little bit of time here. So I'm filling this green in. This is a nice rich green. It's like golf course green here. Really nice and smooth. All right. And just to sort of get our river prepared here, I'm going to get some blue and spread that in here. right. So let's see, where else do I want this river to go? I want it to come this way, maybe this way, and it disappears behind this mountain where it eventually comes out here and in the foreground with us. So I'm just trying to get my paintbrush just a little bit thinner here, and so I'm sort of rubbing it on the I'm trying to get a nice sharp edge, kind of press it against the palette there. And then I'm going to use that straight edge to just kind of define where this river is going to be. There we go. That's not bad. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. We'll use the same atmospheric perspective effect on the river by adding some white to it in just a minute, but I want to just get the bulk of these colors here straightened out. Maybe lift our mountainside up just a little bit. I got carried away with my river and painted it too high, so that's pretty good. So again, we're talking about atmospheric perspective. Things in the back lose detail and they lose saturation. All right, things in the foreground, very saturated, and we'll add some detail in just a little bit. I'm going to put my big brush away. Now, we're at a point where you could let this dry for a little bit and then go back over it. I'm not going to let it dry because I don't want to spend too much time waiting for this. I know I just want to get this kind of keep going and enjoy this process here. While this river's doing its thing, we'll get a little bit of white paint and maybe just kind of go through and do something to this river here. Just add a little bit of foam or something. What do you want to call it? I don't know. This river's a nice peaceful river here. Nice peaceful river. It's one of the things I love about doing these landscapes is like you can create any kind of world just with some tricks between dark and light and color and highlights and shadows, and there's no limit. It's only what you can imagine. That's it. That's the only limit. Let's see if I got this right here. Looks like this other green is drying pretty quickly. This tempera paint dries pretty fast, so that's pretty cool. All right, so in order to make the shadows in the front, in the foreground here for these mountains in the front, instead of using black, it's a lot of people's instinct just to add black to a project to make the shadows. But in this case, we're gonna use a different technique, and this is in order to keep the colors richer, less flat. We want to keep that saturation level in the foreground. So to do that, we are going to make a darker tone of this green. So first we'll get some green, and that's what the green looks like by itself. But now we're going to add the complement of green, which in this circumstance right here is red. Right? And the best way to do this is to add the red a little bit at a time, because as you can see, it only takes a little bit before this gets really dark. Right? And I want to go for like a dark green, and this is going to be my foreground shadow color. So I could take this in here and start adding little textures to this mountain in the front. It's closer to us, right? I'm gonna add little stuff in here to this mountain. Now I'm leaving some space, as you can see. I'm kind of going in and just adding a little bit at a time. Remember, you can always add some more. And then we'll go back and add highlights later, but I just want to get some of his shadows. Remember, again, that light is coming from the top right, so if we kind of maybe put a little shadow on this riverbank here, maybe, you know, some of this is in shadow. I'm also doing kind of like vertical brush strokes here in some situations because I want to denote the presence of vegetation, trees, that kind of stuff. If you want, I mean, this is the part where you can, like, really, if you want to get super detailed with it, and, you know, now that you have everything laid out where you think it's going to go, and I'm not going to get super detailed with it today, so I'm not sweating it too much. I'm just going to get some of this. Just build a shadowy structures here a little bit, and then we'll go in and we'll add the highlights in just a little bit. Now you can see that, I mean, I didn't use black, so you obviously can't see the difference, but if I had used black, just pure black pigment, it tends to flatten out the image. Alright, so I'm going to rinse off my brush, and now I'm going to add some highlights. Now, because we had the lighter highlights, the whites in the background, we're going to use yellow now up front. Yellow, because I really want to lighten up this green and make it something that looks like the sun maybe is hitting. And I feel like yellow is probably a good way to do that. It's a warm color, you know, meaning like in temperature wise, like visually. Now there are cool yellows, but this is kind of a warm color. And this should add to that saturated foreground with bold contrasts and really punch out these colors a little bit. So now our foreground really jumps out at you, right? While that's drying, I'm going to work a little bit on my water down here and get my I got a little detail brush here, and I'm just going to drag it through and make some like river water lines, you know, little scribbly river water lines. Just, you know, when you're doing this, just think about which way the water is running. We're almost done. Just want to think about which way the water is running. You can add stones in there. I probably should have brought some black paint if I was going to do some stones with make a gray or whatever for the stone. There are other ways to do it. I'm just going to skip the stones today. Making sure I got little streams of blue, streams of white. Just trying to make sure like this water is just rushing down through the river. Or it doesn't have to be. It could be a nice, lazy, peaceful river. Maybe you want to hop on an inner tube and just ride down this little river here for a lazy afternoon. That's okay too. Alright, now I feel like the top's pretty empty, so I'm just going to grab some blue paint, maybe a little bit of red, and get my detail brush. I'm going to throw some birds here, just quick little birds. These always work really well to add something interesting in the sky. If it's really empty and boring to look at, you can always just add some birds, right? Let's throw another tiny one up here. It looks like we're about there. So yeah, this is a super easy process. Again, you could do this with mountains like we did today, or you could do it with, the ocean. I've seen some really great spots on the intercoastal waterways that are really fun to paint because, you have those islands and stuff that you can put in the background, and yeah, experiment with this stuff. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just, you just do it. You just practice it and you get more comfortable with it. And then hopefully, before too long, you start to see things that you are happy with yourself. But it's important to be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself during the process, during the learning process, I'm just going through and adding some more shadows, a little bit more shadows in here. On this, I just want you guys to see how easy this process is. This is great for just relaxing and creating something pretty, or making a greeting card you want to send to friends or family, or yeah, all kinds of different uses for this stuff. If you want to paint with your kids or your parents or whoever it is you're hanging out with, I think it's always important to stay creative, to exercise that creativity. See what comes out of it. A lot of people dismiss their creative abilities before even trying. But here, this is a really quick 20-30 minute video on how to make a pretty little landscape using basic elements of design. Whether you painted along with me or just watched and enjoyed the process, I'm really grateful for your time, and I hope that in the future we get to make some art together. Again, this is Matt Richards, artist in residence with Art with a Heart in Healthcare, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Have a great day.